The fork froze in midair when David spoke the words that changed everything. "Mom, when you pass, I'm going to use your inheritance to pay off my credit cards. It's almost $200,000 in debt." He cut another slice of roast beef as if he were talking about the weather. "And Sandra is going to buy that BMW she's always wanted." I felt the blood turn cold in my veins, but I kept smiling. 38 years raising those two, working 60 hours a week as a lawyer, saving every penny after Robert died. For this. "Is that so?" I managed to say, serving more mashed potatoes onto Sandra's plate. My daughter nodded eagerly, her eyes gleaming with a greed that made me nauseous. "Exactly. And Rick is going to trade in the pickup for a Cadillac Escalade. We've already calculated everything, Mom. With what you have in savings, investments, and this house, it covers all our plans, and there's still some left over." Silence weighed heavily over the dining table, where we had celebrated every birthday, every Christmas, every family achievement. Harper, my 22-year-old granddaughter, looked mortified, pushing food around on her plate without meeting my eyes. "You already calculated?" My voice came out calmer than I expected. David laughed, that arrogant laugh I'd known since he was 12. "Of course, Mom. We're not kids. We know you have at least $1.5 million altogether. That's more than enough to fix our lives, fix their lives, as if I were an obstacle, a problem to be solved. And don't you worry," Sandra added, licking her lips like a satisfied cat. "We'll keep some pictures of you, maybe that porcelain you love so much. Nothing will go to waste." Rick, Sandra's husband, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Sandra, maybe this isn't the right time." "It's exactly the right time." David slammed his fist on the table, making the plates rattle. "Mom needs to know our plans. It's only fair she knows how her money will be well used instead of just sitting in an account." I took a deep breath, remembering Pastor Williams's words. "Margaret, sometimes God shows us people's true faces to protect us from what's coming." 2 years ago, when I began to suspect my children's true intentions, I made a decision. James Morrison, my lawyer for 15 years, had suggested something that had sounded far too radical at the time. Now, watching my children divide up my inheritance like vultures over a carcass, I realized James had been right. "I'm glad you've got everything planned," I finally said, getting up to fetch dessert. "Apple pie, anyone?" David and Sandra exchanged satisfied glances. They probably took my calmness as approval, as if I were some senile old woman happy to know my hard-earned money would be used to pay for their irresponsibility. Harper finally looked up, and I saw tears in her eyes. My granddaughter had always been different from her parents. She worked part-time while studying nursing, never asked me for a cent beyond what I offered for her education. She knew this was wrong. "Grandma," she whispered, "I didn't know they—" "Don't worry, darling." I gently touched her shoulder. "Everything will be fine." When I came back from the kitchen with the pie, David was already calculating out loud how he'd divide the money. Sandra was showing pictures of her dream BMW on her phone. Rick stared at his plate, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. I cut generous slices of pie for everyone, including myself. The recipe was my mother's, passed down through generations. Ironically, it would be one of the last things I shared with my children as the generous mother I had always been. "This pie is delicious, Mom," David said between bites. "You've always been such a great cook. I'll miss this when when I die." He couldn't even say the words, but he had already divided up my belongings in his mind. "Thank you, dear." I smiled and served him more pie. "You deserve the best." They had no idea what was coming. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. 2 years ago, I sat in James Morrison's mahogany-paneled office, my hands trembling as I signed the papers that would change everything. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Margaret?" James had asked, his gray eyes filled with concern. "Once we establish this irrevocable trust, there's no going back. Your children won't be able to touch a single penny." I remembered pausing, pen hovering over the signature line. Through his office window, I could see Portland's skyline, the city where I'd built my law practice from nothing, where I'd raised David and Sandra as a single mother after their father died young. Everything I'd worked for was about to be locked away from them. "I'm certain," I'd whispered, and signed my name with a steady hand. Now, washing dishes after Sunday dinner, I replayed that conversation in my mind. The catalyst had been a phone call I'd overheard 3 months earlier. David and Sandra, whispering in my kitchen while I supposedly napped upstairs. "She's got to have at least 2 million, Sandra had hissed. "The house alone is worth 800,000. "More," David had replied. "Plus her retirement accounts, the life insurance payout from Dad, her investment portfolio. Mom was always smart with money. Well, she better not blow it all on some charity nonsense before she dies. We've earned this, David. All those years of putting up with her lectures about responsibility and saving money. Putting up with me, their mother, the woman who'd worked 16-hour days to pay for their college educations, their weddings, their down payments on houses they couldn't afford. That night, I'd called James. My phone rang now, startling me from the memory. James's name appeared on the screen. "Margaret? I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. I was just thinking about our conversation from 2 years ago." His chuckle was warm. "Ah, the trust documents. Everything's still secure, if that's what you're wondering. Fort Knox couldn't be more protected." "Good." I dried my hands on the dish towel, one that Harper had made for me in high school home economics class, because I think it's time they found out. Silence on the other end. Then, what happened? I told him about the dinner conversation, every cold, calculating word. When I finished, James sighed deeply. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I'd hoped your instincts were wrong." So had I. I walked to my living room, where family photos lined the mantelpiece. David's graduation from business school, Sandra's wedding day, Harper's sweet 16 party. All those moments when I'd believed we were a loving family. "James, I need to know. Can we arrange for them to find out officially? At your office?" "Of course. When were you thinking?" Before I could answer, I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the front window, I saw Harper walking up my front steps, her face streaked with tears. "I have to go," I told James. "My granddaughter's here." I opened the door before Harper could knock. She fell into my arms immediately, sobbing. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I'm so ashamed of them." "Shh, sweetheart. Come in." I guided her to my couch, the same one where I'd read her bedtime stories when she was little. "Tell me what's wrong. I heard them in the car after we left." Harper wiped her nose with a tissue I handed her. "Dad was already calling some loan shark about borrowing money against your inheritance. And Mom, she was on her phone ordering furniture for the house they want to buy with your money." My heart clenched, but not with surprise, with sadness for the children I'd raised who'd become these strangers. "And there's more, Grandma." Harper's voice dropped to a whisper. "They've been talking to Dr. Peterson about having you declared mentally incompetent. They think if they can prove you're not capable of managing your own affairs." The words hung in the air like poison gas. My own children, planning to steal my independence, my dignity, everything I'd worked for, by having me declared mentally unfit. "When?" I asked quietly. "Mom has an appointment set up for you next week. She was going to call and tell you it was just a routine checkup." I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the garden Robert and I had planted together 30 years ago. The roses we'd chosen for our anniversary, the oak tree we'd planted when David was born. All of it would be sold, divided, consumed by their greed. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated their mother. "Harper, honey, I need you to listen carefully." I turned back to her, and she must have seen something in my expression because she sat up straighter. "Your parents are in for a surprise, a big one." "What do you mean?" "I mean that your father can call all the loan sharks he wants. Your mother can order all the furniture she desires, because when the time comes for them to claim their inheritance, they're going to discover something very interesting." Harper's eyes widened. "Grandma, what did you do?" I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd had all day. "I protected myself, sweetheart, and I protected you." My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sandra. "Mom, don't forget your doctor's appointment next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Dr. Peterson wants to do a full evaluation. Love you." I showed the message to Harper, who gasped. "She's already scheduled it?" "It appears so." I deleted the message and looked at my granddaughter. "But don't worry. By Tuesday, they'll have much bigger problems to worry about than my mental health, because tomorrow, I was calling James to arrange the meeting that would change everything." Monday morning arrived with the sound of my doorbell ringing at 7:30. Through the peephole, I saw David pacing on my front porch, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing wildly. I opened the door just as he was saying, No, you don't understand. This is guaranteed money. My mother's estate is worth at least 2 million. He looked up, startled, and quickly ended the call. Mom, good morning. You're up early. I've always been an early riser, David. You know that. I stepped aside to let him in, noting the expensive suit he was wearing, one he definitely couldn't afford on his salary. Coffee? That would be great. He followed me to the kitchen, his phone buzzing constantly. Each notification seemed to make him more agitated. Listen, Mom, I wanted to talk to you about yesterday. Oh? I poured 2 cups of coffee, adding cream to his just the way he liked it as a child. I hope we didn't upset you with our planning discussion. It's just that Sandra and I want to be responsible about the future. Responsible. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. I handed him the coffee and sat across from him at my kitchen table. Tell me about these plans, David. His eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Well, first I'll pay off the credit cards. Then there's the second mortgage on the house. That's another $100,000. And I've been looking at this investment opportunity. As he talked, his phone kept buzzing. Finally, I couldn't ignore it anymore. You seem popular this morning. David's face flushed. It's just, well, I may have mentioned to a few people that our family situation is about to change significantly. What kind of people? Before he could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Platinum Lending. Marcus. I should probably take this, he muttered. By all means. I watched my son transform into someone I didn't recognize as he answered the call. Marcus, yes, I can meet today. The collateral is solid, I guarantee it. No, she doesn't know about the loan yet, but what do you mean, documentation? She's my mother, for crying out loud. My blood ran cold. He was trying to borrow money against my estate while I was still alive and sitting right in front of him. I'll call you back, David said quickly, ending the call. Sorry about that. David, what exactly did you tell these people? Nothing much, just that I'd soon have access to significant family funds. The front door opened without a knock, and Sandra's voice echoed through the house. Mom, it's me! She appeared in the kitchen doorway, her arms full of shopping bags from high-end stores I knew she couldn't afford. Sandra? What's all this? Just a few things I picked up. She set the bags down proudly. I figured since we're going to have more flexibility soon, I might as well start transitioning to the lifestyle I deserve. She pulled out a designer handbag that I knew cost more than most people's monthly rent. Isn't it gorgeous? And look at this. She unwrapped what appeared to be an expensive watch. Rick's going to love it. How did you pay for all this? I asked quietly. Sandra and David exchanged a look. Well, Sandra said carefully, I may have opened a new credit account, just temporarily, until our situation improves. You mean until I die? The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Finally, David cleared his throat. Mom, you're being dramatic. We're just being practical about the future. Are we? I stood up and walked to the window. Mrs. Rodriguez was tending her garden next door, probably wondering why David's car was in my driveway so early. And what if that future doesn't look exactly like you're imagining? Sandra laughed, but it sounded forced. What do you mean? Mom, you're not going to do something crazy like leave everything to charity, are you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Would that be so terrible? I asked. Yes, Sandra exploded. Mom, we're your children. We've been here for you. We deserve this inheritance. Put up with what exactly? David jumped in quickly. She didn't mean anything, Mom. We love you. You know that. My phone rang, saving them from having to elaborate on their love. It was Harper. Grandma, can you talk? Of course, sweetheart. I'm at the financial aid office at school. Something weird happened. They said someone called this morning asking about my student loans and whether I'd be able to pay them off soon. I felt the room spin slightly. Who called? They wouldn't say. But Grandma, I think it might have been Dad. I looked at David, who was suddenly very interested in his coffee cup. Harper, I'll call you back in a few minutes. When I hung up, both my children were staring at me. David, did you call Harper's school? I might have inquired about her financial situation. If we're going to help the family, I need to know where everyone stands. Help the family? My voice was dangerously quiet. Or help yourself. Sandra's phone chimed with a notification. She glanced at it and squealed with excitement. Oh my God, the BMW dealership just approved my financing application. They want me to come in this afternoon to finalize everything. She showed us her phone screen, which displayed an approval for a $70,000 car loan. Sandra, how can you possibly qualify for that kind of financing? I told them about our upcoming inheritance. They were very understanding once I explained the situation. I stared at my children. These strangers who shared my DNA, but none of my values. They had spent money they didn't have, made promises they couldn't keep, and involved my granddaughter in their delusions of wealth. And they had no idea that every dollar they thought they were inheriting was locked away in an irrevocable trust, as untouchable as the stars in the sky. "Well," I said finally, "this should be interesting." David's phone rang again. Platinum Lending, Marcus, appeared on the screen once more. "Take your call, son," I said, standing up. "But you might want to start thinking about what you're going to tell Marcus when he asks for that documentation." As I walked upstairs, I heard David answer the phone with false confidence. "Marcus, ready to move forward with the paperwork. By the time they discovered the truth, they'd be drowning in debt they'd accumulated against an inheritance that didn't exist. And for the first time since yesterday's dinner revelation, I found myself almost looking forward to watching them learn that actions have consequences. It's amazing how quickly people can spend money they don't actually have. I was watching my own children dig themselves into a hole so deep they'd need a miracle to climb out. Tuesday evening, Harper called me in tears. "Grandma, I can't take it anymore. I have to tell you what I heard." I was in my study, going through old photo albums, pictures of David's Little League games, Sandra's dance recitals, family vacations when they still hugged me without calculating my net worth. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I went to Dad's house tonight to pick up some books I left there. They didn't know I was coming." Her voice was shaking. "Grandma, they were on the phone with some kind of facility." My pen froze over the checkbook I'd been balancing. "What kind of facility?" A care home. They were asking about admission procedures for someone with early-stage dementia and how quickly they could get someone admitted if the family was concerned about their safety. The words hit me like ice water. I set down my pen and gripped the phone tighter. "Go on." Mom was taking notes, asking about visiting hours and whether they had private rooms. She kept saying things like, "We just want what's best for her," and the family is very concerned about her living alone. I closed my eyes, remembering all the times I'd driven Sandra to dance class, stayed up all night when she had pneumonia, worked extra hours to pay for her wedding dress. "There's more, isn't there?" Dad called Dr. Peterson after Mom hung up. He told him you'd been showing signs of confusion and forgetfulness. He said you'd been repeating yourself and forgetting conversations, none of which is true. "I know that, but Grandma, Dr. Peterson seemed to believe him. Dad scheduled that appointment for tomorrow at 2 p.m., and he specifically requested a cognitive assessment." I stood up and walked to my window. Across the street, the Hendersons were playing with their grandchildren in the front yard. Normal family life. What mine used to be. "Harper, did they say anything else?" "Yes." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom said once you're in the facility, they'll have power of attorney and can access all your accounts immediately. She said they won't have to wait for you to die." The full scope of their plan crystallized in my mind. They weren't just planning to inherit my money. They were planning to steal it while I was still alive by having me declared incompetent and institutionalized. And Dad said something that made me sick to my stomach. "What?" He said, "The old lady's been controlling us with her money our whole lives. Time for the tables to turn." The old lady. Not Mom. Not Mother. The old lady. I sat back down heavily. 43 years of motherhood reduced to the old lady who needed to be eliminated so they could access her bank accounts. "Grandma, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than fine, actually." "What do you mean?" "I mean your parents have just made the biggest mistake of their lives." I could hear Harper moving around, probably pacing like she did when she was nervous. "Grandma, I'm scared. What if they actually convince Dr. Peterson that you're not competent? What if they force you into that place?" "Harper, listen to me very carefully. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., I want you to be at Dr. Peterson's office." "What? Why?" "Because you're going to witness something very interesting. Your parents think they're going to have me declared mentally incompetent. Instead, they're going to discover just how sharp their old lady really is." I opened my laptop and started typing an email to James Morrison. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to call their bluff. And then I'm going to call a family meeting they'll never forget." As I typed, I could hear Harper crying softly. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I can't believe they're my parents. I can't believe they're doing this to you." "Oh, sweetheart, this isn't your fault. And you know what? In a strange way, I'm grateful." "Grateful?" "Yes, because now I know exactly who they really are. No more wondering, no more hoping they'll change, no more making excuses for their behavior. They've shown me their true hearts. I finished the email to James and hit send. Tomorrow's appointment with Dr. Peterson was going to be very different from what David and Sandra were expecting. Harper, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to trust me. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever you see or hear, just remember that your grandmother didn't survive 40 years as a lawyer by being naive or helpless. Okay. And Harper, after tomorrow, I want you to start thinking about what you really want to do with your life, not just the nursing program. I mean everything. Your dreams, your goals, the life you want to build. Why? Because someone who truly loves you is about to make sure you have every opportunity to achieve those dreams. After I hung up, I sat in my study for a long time, looking at those old family photos. David blowing out birthday candles, Sandra in her first communion dress, Robert and me holding our babies, so proud, so hopeful for their futures. Tomorrow, I would go to that doctor's appointment. I would submit to their cognitive tests with a smile, and then I would watch their faces when Dr. Peterson declared me to be in perfect mental health. But that would just be the appetizer. The main course would come later, in James Morrison's office, when they discovered that their brilliant plan to steal my life savings had one tiny flaw. There was no money left to steal. Sometimes our children break our hearts in ways we never imagined possible. But I was about to learn that a broken heart can still be a fierce heart. Wednesday morning, I woke before dawn and made myself a cup of tea, the same chamomile blend Robert used to drink when he couldn't sleep. Today was the day of Dr. Peterson's appointment, and I wanted to remember exactly why I was fighting. I pulled out the old cedar chest from my bedroom closet, the one that held our most precious memories. Inside were letters, cards, and documents that told the story of my family, the real story, not the revisionist version my children seemed to believe. The first letter I found was from David, written when he was 8 years old. Dear Mommy, thank you for working so hard so I can have new shoes for school. I know you are tired, but you are the best mommy in the world. I will be good and make you proud. Love, David. I traced the crooked handwriting with my finger. Where had that little boy gone? The one who noticed my exhaustion, who appreciated my sacrifices. Next was a card from Sandra's high school graduation. Mom, I know I haven't always been easy, but thank you for never giving up on me. You worked 2 jobs to pay for my SAT prep classes and college applications. I promise I'll make something of myself that will make you proud. You're my hero. Love always, Sandra. You're my hero. I remembered that day so clearly. How Sandra had hugged me tight after the ceremony, tears in her eyes as she thanked me for believing in her dreams of becoming a teacher. She'd abandoned that dream within 6 months, deciding that teaching doesn't pay enough for the lifestyle I want. I found Robert's life insurance paperwork next, the policy I'd cashed in to pay for David's MBA program when he couldn't get approved for student loans. $50,000 that was supposed to be my emergency fund, gone in 1 semester because my son needed to attend the most expensive business school that would accept him. Then there were the bank statements from Sandra's wedding. $35,000, my entire savings account at the time, because she deserved the fairy tale wedding she'd always dreamed of. I'd eaten peanut butter sandwiches for dinner for 6 months to rebuild my emergency fund. The medical bills came next. When David's daughter Harper was born, with complications requiring NICU care, whose credit cards had maxed out, paying the portions insurance wouldn't cover. When Sandra needed emergency surgery after her car accident, who took out a second mortgage to pay the deductibles? Document after document, sacrifice after sacrifice. I'd given them everything: my money, my time, my retirement security, my peace of mind. And somehow, in their minds, I'd become the obstacle to their happiness instead of the foundation that made their lives possible. My phone rang. James Morrison. Margaret, I got your email. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed this way? James, they're planning to have me declared incompetent so they can access my money immediately. They've already spent thousands of dollars against an inheritance they think is coming. It's time. I've prepared everything you requested. The documentation is irrefutable. The trust was established 2 years ago, properly witnessed and notarized. Every asset has been transferred. The account balances are 0. What about the provision for Harper? Her education fund is completely separate and protected. Full tuition and living expenses through medical school if she chooses, plus a housing allowance for her first 5 years of practice. I smiled, thinking of my granddaughter's face when she learned she could pursue her dreams without the crushing weight of student debt. And the charitable donations? Scheduled to begin immediately upon activation. The Children's Hospital, the Women's Shelter, the Literacy Program, they'll all receive their designated portions. Perfect. Margaret, I have to ask, are you prepared for their reaction? This is going to devastate them. I looked at the pile of letters and documents spread across my bed. Evidence of decades of one-sided generosity, of a mother's love that had been taken for granted and ultimately scorned. James, my children have already made their choice. They chose greed over gratitude, manipulation over love. I'm simply choosing to protect myself and secure Harper's future. When do you want to schedule the reading? Tomorrow, 4 p.m. Make sure they bring their spouses. After I hung up, I gathered all the letters and documents and put them in a folder. Evidence of the mother I'd been, the sacrifices I'd made, the love I'd given. When David and Sandra tried to paint me as selfish or vindictive, this folder would tell the truth. At 1:30 p.m., I dressed carefully for my appointment with Dr. Peterson. A tailored suit, pearl earrings, subtle makeup. I wanted to look like exactly what I was. A competent, intelligent woman who had built a successful career and managed her finances responsibly for decades. Harper was waiting in the parking lot when I arrived, her face pale with worry. Grandma, are you sure about this? More sure than I've ever been about anything. As we walked into the medical building, I saw David's car pulling into the parking lot. He and Sandra got out, both of them wearing expressions of false concern that made my stomach turn. Mom, Sandra called out, hurrying over to us. There you are. We were worried you might forget about the appointment. Forget. The first shot in their campaign to prove my mental incompetence. I never forget important appointments, Sandra. You know that. David appeared at my elbow, taking my arm in a way that looked supportive but felt controlling. Let us help you, Mom. We know these medical visits can be confusing. The only thing confusing is why you think I need help walking into a building I've been visiting for 20 years. As we entered Dr. Peterson's office, I caught Harper's eye and gave her a small wink. My children thought they were about to witness their mother's mental decline. Instead, they were about to discover that their mother was about to outmaneuver them in ways they'd never see coming. The hardest part wasn't what they were trying to do to me. It was realizing that the children I'd raised with so much love had become strangers who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with legs. Dr. Peterson's examination room felt like a courtroom as we all filed in. David immediately positioned himself next to the doctor's chair, while Sandra took out a small notebook, presumably to document my confused responses. Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Peterson began, your son called with some concerns about your memory and cognitive function. He mentioned you've been having episodes of confusion? I blinked slowly, as if processing the question was difficult. Episodes? What kind of episodes? David leaned forward eagerly. Mom, remember last week when you called me 3 times asking the same question about your bank statements? I had never called David about bank statements, ever, but I played along. I did? I touched my forehead with trembling fingers. I thought I only called once. Harper's eyes widened in alarm from her corner chair. I gave her the slightest shake of my head. And Mom, Sandra added, you've been leaving the stove on. Remember when I found the burner still going when you thought you'd turned it off? Another complete fabrication. But I nodded uncertainly. Oh dear, I thought I remembered turning it off. Dr. Peterson made notes while my children painted a picture of a declining woman who couldn't be trusted with her own safety or finances. With each invented incident, their voices grew more confident, more convinced of their own righteousness. Mrs. Thompson, I'd like to run through some standard cognitive assessments, Dr. Peterson said gently. Can you tell me what year it is? It's 2025, I answered, then paused as if uncertain. Isn't it? That's correct. And who is the current president? Donald Trump. I said this with complete confidence, then caught myself. Wait, is that right? Sometimes I get confused about... David and Sandra exchanged triumphant glances. For the next 30 minutes, I gave a masterful performance of mild cognitive decline. I answered most questions correctly, but with hesitation. I forgot a few details from the word recall test. I pretended to struggle with simple math problems I could solve in my sleep. Now, Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Peterson said, I understand you live alone. Do you feel safe managing your daily activities? This was the moment they'd been waiting for. Well, I said slowly, sometimes I do worry about the money things, the bills and the, what do you call them? Investments. Sandra practically purred. Mom, we've been telling you. David and I would be happy to help you with all that financial stuff. Wouldn't that take a lot of stress off your shoulders? You would do that for me? I looked at her with grateful eyes. Even though it must be such a burden? No burden at all, Mom, David said smoothly. We love you. We just want to make sure you're protected. Dr. Peterson completed his examination and stepped out to consult his notes. Through the thin walls, I could hear him talking to his nurse. Mild cognitive impairment, possibly early-stage dementia. The family is right to be concerned. She shouldn't be managing complex financial decisions alone. When he returned, my children were practically vibrating with anticipation. Mrs. Thompson, based on today's assessment, I do have some concerns about your cognitive function. While you're certainly capable of daily self-care, I would recommend that you consider having family members assist with more complex decisions, particularly financial ones. You see, Mom, Sandra said, squeezing my hand with fake tenderness, we just want what's best for you. I know, sweetheart. I patted her hand. You're such good children. As we left the office, David was already on his phone. Marcus, it's David Thompson. We're moving forward with the loan application. I have medical documentation now. Yes, power of attorney should be straightforward. Sandra was texting furiously, probably to the BMW dealership. Harper walked beside me in silence, her face a mask of horror at what she'd witnessed. But as we reached the parking lot, I straightened my shoulders and my voice regained its normal strength. Harper, would you mind driving me home? I have some phone calls to make. Mom, are you feeling all right? David asked with fake concern. You seem different than you were in there. I'm feeling perfectly fine, David. In fact, I haven't felt this clear-headed in years. Something in my tone made him pause. What do you mean? I mean that was quite a performance we just gave, Dr. Peterson. I'm particularly impressed with the detail you put into those stories about my supposed confusion. Very creative. The color drained from Sandra's face. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that I've never called David about bank statements. I've never left the stove on, and my cognitive function is sharper than it's been in decades. I looked directly at Dr. Peterson, who had followed us outside. Doctor, I believe you should know that everything my children just told you about my mental state was completely fabricated. Dr. Peterson's mouth fell open. Excuse me? I was testing them, Doctor. I wanted to see exactly how far they would go in their attempt to have me declared incompetent. The answer, apparently, is that they're willing to commit fraud. David's face turned red. Mom, you're not making sense. You just proved in there that you're confused. Did I? I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. A red dot showed it had been recording for the past hour. Because I have the entire conversation documented, including your completely false statements about my mental health. Sandra grabbed David's arm. She recorded us? Every word, including your phone call to Marcus about the loan, David. And Sandra, I assume that text you just sent to the BMW dealer was about finalizing your financing based on my supposed incapacity? The parking lot was silent, except for the sound of traffic from the nearby street. Tomorrow at 4 p.m., I continued, we're all going to meet at James Morrison's office. There are some things about my estate planning that you need to know. What kind of things? David's voice was barely a whisper. The kind of things that are going to make today's little performance completely irrelevant. As Harper and I walked to her car, I heard Sandra hiss to David, what does she mean? What could she have possibly done? If they had any idea what was waiting for them tomorrow, they would have gotten on their knees right there in the parking lot and begged for forgiveness. But it was far too late for that. Watching them lie so easily about my mental state was the final confirmation I needed. Tomorrow, they would learn that underestimating a sharp mind is always a mistake. Thursday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was having my coffee and reviewing James Morrison's agenda for today's 4 p.m. meeting when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Rick, Sandra's husband, standing alone on my porch. Rick had always been the quieter one in their marriage, content to let Sandra take the lead in most situations. But today, his face looked haggard, like he hadn't slept. Rick, what brings you by so early? Mrs. Thompson, I need to talk to you about what's happening. I invited him in and poured him a cup of coffee. His hands shook slightly as he lifted it to his lips. "I don't know how to say this," he began, "but I can't be part of what Sandra and David are planning anymore." "What exactly do you think they're planning?" Rick set down his coffee and looked me directly in the eyes. "I know about the loans, the credit applications, the lies to Dr. Peterson. I know Sandra has already spent $15,000 on furniture for a house we can't afford, all because she thinks your inheritance is going to solve our financial problems. And what do you think about that?" "I think it's wrong. I think what they did yesterday was despicable." His voice cracked. "Mrs. Thompson, you've been nothing but generous to our family. You paid for our wedding, helped with the down payment on our house, never asked for anything in return except to be treated with respect." I waited, sensing there was more. "Last night, Sandra came home with paperwork for a power of attorney. She wants me to witness her signature when she gets you to sign it. She said it would be temporary, just until Mom gets better. But," he shook his head, "there's nothing wrong with you, is there?" "Not a thing." "I figured as much. You've always been the sharpest person I know." Rick stood up and paced to my window. "Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know that I never agreed to any of this. Sandra told me you were having memory problems, but I've been around you enough to know that wasn't true." "What changed your mind definitively?" "Yesterday, after we left Dr. Peterson's office, Sandra was on the phone with David planning how to divide up your assets. She said, and I quote, 'The old bat finally took the bait. We'll have access to everything within a week.'" The old bat, my daughter's term of endearment for her mother. "But here's the thing that really got to me," Rick continued. "They started talking about what to do with you after they get the power of attorney. Sandra said maybe they should look into a nice facility where you'd be more comfortable, and they wouldn't have to worry about you changing your mind about anything." The full scope of their plan was becoming clearer. Not just financial theft, but complete isolation. "Rick, I appreciate you telling me this. There's something else." He pulled out his phone. "I recorded their conversation last night. I thought maybe you should hear exactly what they said about you." He played the recording. Sandra's voice came through clearly. "David, once we have power of attorney, we can sell the house immediately. Mom doesn't need to live in a place that big anyway. We can put her somewhere nice but affordable and use the difference to pay off our debts." David's voice responded, "Exactly. And once she's in care, she won't be able to interfere with our financial decisions. We can finally live the way we deserve to live. I just can't believe it took us this long to realize that Mom was sitting on all this money while we struggled. It's not fair, David. We're her children. We should have had access to this wealth years ago. I listened to my children discuss my future as if I were already dead, or worse, as if I were a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. Thank you for showing me this, Rick. Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know that I'm not going to be part of whatever they're planning. I've already told Sandra I won't witness any documents, and I won't lie to any doctors or lawyers." Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Rodriguez from next door. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I think you should know. There's been a man sitting in a car across from your house for the past 2 hours, taking pictures." I looked out the window and saw a silver sedan parked down the street. "Rick, do you know anything about someone's surveillance on my house?" His face went pale. "Oh no. Sandra mentioned something about hiring a private investigator to document any concerning behavior that might help their case for guardianship. They hired someone to spy on me?" "I think so. She said they needed evidence that you weren't capable of living alone safely." My doorbell rang again. This time it was Harper, looking anxious. "Grandma, there's something weird going on. Some guy approached me at school yesterday asking questions about you. He wanted to know if I'd noticed any changes in your behavior, if you seemed confused or forgetful." "What did you tell him?" "I told him to mind his own business and walked away." "But Grandma, who was he?" Rick answered for me. "Probably the private investigator your parents hired." Harper's mouth fell open. "They're having Grandma investigated." "It appears so." "That's it." Harper pulled out her phone. "I'm calling them right now." "Wait," I said, putting my hand on her arm. "Let me ask you both something. Are you prepared to stand with me this afternoon when they discover the truth about my estate?" "What truth?" Rick asked. "That there is no inheritance for them to claim." The silence in my kitchen was profound. "What do you mean?" Harper whispered. "I mean that 2 years ago, after I realized what kind of people my children had become, I protected my assets in an irrevocable trust. David and Sandra will inherit exactly nothing." Rick sat down heavily. Nothing? Nothing. The money will go to charity and to Harper's education. They can spy on me, lie about me, and scheme all they want. But at the end of the day, all they'll have accomplished is revealing their true character. Harper started crying. Grandma, they're going to be so angry. Yes, they will, which is why I need to know. Are you both willing to be there when it happens? Are you prepared for their reaction? Rick stood up straighter. Mrs. Thompson, I've watched my wife turn into someone I don't recognize over the past few weeks. Maybe this will be the wake-up call she needs. And Harper? I'll be there, Grandma. I'll always be there for you. As they left to prepare for the afternoon meeting, I watched the private investigator's car from my window. He was probably reporting to David and Sandra that their mother had received 2 visitors this morning and appeared to be functioning normally. What he couldn't report was that their mother had just secured 2 witnesses to their character, witnesses who would be present when their house of cards came tumbling down. Sometimes the people who stand by us aren't the ones we expect. Rick and Harper gave me something I didn't know I needed, proof that not everyone in my family had lost their moral compass. At 3:30 p.m., I sat in my car outside James Morrison's law office, watching David and Sandra arrive. They'd clearly dressed for the occasion. David in his most expensive suit, Sandra in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. They walked with the confident stride of people who believed they were about to inherit a fortune. Rick arrived separately, his face grim. Harper was already inside. She'd come early to help me carry some documents. My phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. Mom, where are you? We're all here waiting. I typed back, on my way up. James Morrison's office occupied the entire top floor of a downtown Portland high-rise. His receptionist, Mrs. Kim, had worked with him for 20 years and knew exactly what was about to unfold. Mrs. Thompson, she said warmly, everyone is gathered in the conference room. I walked down the familiar hallway, past framed diplomas and awards that James had earned over his distinguished career. At the end of the hall, through glass doors, I could see my family seated around a polished mahogany table. David was drumming his fingers impatiently. Sandra was checking her phone, probably calculating how quickly she could access funds. Rick sat apart from his wife, staring out the window. Harper was pale but determined, clutching the folder of letters and documents I'd given her earlier. Good afternoon, everyone, I said as I entered the room. James Morrison stood to greet me. At 55, he was still an imposing figure. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that commanded respect in courtrooms. Margaret, please have a seat. He gestured to the chair at the head of the table. I believe everyone knows why we're here today. Actually, David said, we're not entirely sure. Mom was rather cryptic about the purpose of this meeting. James opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. We're here to discuss Mrs. Thompson's estate planning and to clarify some misconceptions that seem to have developed regarding her inheritance. Sandra leaned forward eagerly. Finally, we've been trying to help Mom understand that she needs assistance managing her finances, especially given her recent difficulties. What difficulties would those be? James asked. Well, her memory issues, the confusion about financial matters, the safety concerns. David listed these as if they were established facts. I see. James made a note. And these concerns led you to take certain actions? We've been very responsible about everything, Sandra said. We even had her evaluated by Dr. Peterson yesterday to document her condition. Ah, yes, the medical evaluation where you provided testimony about Mrs. Thompson's cognitive state. James pulled out a tablet and pressed play. My voice filled the room. Doctor, I believe you should know that everything my children just told you about my mental state was completely fabricated. David's face went white. You recorded that? Every word, I said calmly. Including your phone call to Marcus about the loan you're trying to secure against my estate. Sandra's composure cracked. Mom, you're being paranoid. We're trying to help you. Help me what exactly? Let me read you something. I nodded to Harper, who opened the folder and handed me a document. This is a credit application you filled out yesterday, Sandra. Under expected income changes, you wrote, significant inheritance anticipated within 30 days due to family members' declining health. Sandra grabbed for the paper. How did you get that? The same way I got this. I held up another document. David's loan application, where he lists my estate as collateral for a $250,000 loan. Mom, listen, David said desperately. We can explain all of this. Can you explain this? Harper spoke for the first time, pulling out Rick's phone. Rick recorded your conversation last night. She played the recording of Sandra calling me the old bat and discussing putting me in a nice facility so they could sell my house. The silence that followed was deafening. Well, James said finally, I think it's time we addressed the actual purpose of this meeting. He pulled out a bound document and placed it in the center of the table. This is Mrs. Thompson's last will and testament, updated and finalized 2 years ago. David reached for it immediately. Let me see that. By all means. James slid it toward him. Though I should mention that the will itself is largely irrelevant now. What do you mean, irrelevant? Sandra demanded. I mean that Mrs. Thompson transferred all of her assets into an irrevocable trust 24 months ago. The house, the investment accounts, the savings, the life insurance policies, everything. David was scanning the pages frantically. That's impossible. She would have told us. Why would she tell you? James asked. The trust documents clearly state that beneficiaries are to be notified only upon the grantor's death or incapacitation. Beneficiaries? Sandra's voice was barely a whisper. We're the beneficiaries, right? James opened another folder. Let me read the beneficiary list. Portland Children's Hospital, 30%. Homeless Women's Shelter, 20%. Adult Literacy Program, 20%. Harper Thompson Educational Fund, 20%. Emergency Reserves for Grantor, 10%. The numbers hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Wait, David said slowly. Where are Sandra and I on that list? You're not. Sandra shot to her feet. What? That's impossible. We're her children. Being someone's child doesn't guarantee inheritance, Sandra, James said matter-of-factly. And given what I've heard today about loan applications, credit fraud, and attempts to have Mrs. Thompson declared incompetent, this is insane. David slammed his hand on the table. Mom, you can't do this to us. I already did it, I said quietly. 2 years ago, when I realized that you saw me as nothing more than a bank account. But we're family. Sandra was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks. You can't leave us with nothing. The same nothing you left me with when you planned to put me in a care facility so you could sell my house? The same nothing you felt for me when you called me the old bat behind my back? Rick spoke up for the first time. Sandra, stop. This is what you deserve. She whirled on him. You knew about this? You were in on it? I knew our marriage was over the moment you started treating your mother like a commodity instead of a person. Harper reached across the table and took my hand. Grandma, thank you. But I don't need money to love you. I know, sweetheart. That's exactly why you're getting it. David was still staring at the documents, his face ashen. Mom, please. We made mistakes, but we're your children. There has to be something. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and sacrificed for, who had just spent the last week trying to steal my independence and dignity. There is something, David. Hope flickered in his eyes. There's a lesson. Actions have consequences. Character matters, and the people who truly love you will never try to take away your freedom or your dignity for their own gain. I stood up to leave. James, thank you for handling this so professionally. As I reached the door, Sandra's voice stopped me. Mom, wait. We can change. We can be better. Please don't do this. I turned back to face my children one last time. The tragedy isn't that you won't inherit my money, Sandra. The tragedy is that you threw away something far more valuable, your integrity, your character, and your mother's love, for money that was never going to be yours anyway. Tomorrow, they would wake up to a new reality. But tonight, for the first time in years, I would sleep peacefully, knowing I'd protected what mattered most. The silence in James Morrison's conference room was broken only by the sound of Sandra's sobbing and the distant hum of Portland traffic 20 stories below. David was the first to recover from the shock. This isn't over, he said, his voice taking on a threatening edge I'd never heard before. We'll contest this. We'll prove you were manipulated, that you weren't in your right mind when you signed these documents. James Morrison smiled coldly. With what evidence? The medical records showing your mother's perfect cognitive function? The recordings of you lying to doctors? The financial documents proving you've been defrauding lenders based on a non-existent inheritance? You don't understand. Sandra wiped her nose with the back of her hand, her designer composure completely shattered. We owe money, real money, to people who don't just send collection letters. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a flicker of concern. What do you mean? David's face had gone gray. The loan from Marcus. It wasn't from a bank, Mom. It was from private lenders, the kind who break kneecaps when you don't pay. How much? I asked. 200,000, David whispered. Sandra's crying intensified. And I signed personally for the BMW loan and the furniture. If we can't pay, they'll take our house, our cars, everything. I looked at my children, really looked at them. Beneath the greed and manipulation, they were terrified. They'd gambled everything on an inheritance that didn't exist, and now they were facing financial ruin. There's more, Rick said quietly. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. Sandra, tell them about the credit cards. Rick, don't tell them. Sandra's voice was barely audible. I maxed out 6 credit cards, $50,000. I thought we'd be able to pay them off next week. James Morrison was taking notes, so let me understand this correctly. Between the private loan, the car financing, the furniture purchases, and the credit card debt, you've accumulated roughly $300,000 in obligations based on an inheritance you never confirmed existed? David nodded miserably. And some of these debts are to organizations that might resort to violence to collect? Another nod. Harper spoke up, her voice shaking with emotion. Grandma, I know they've been horrible to you, but they're still my parents. If something happens to them, I closed my eyes and thought about Robert, about what he would have wanted me to do. Then I thought about the little boy who wrote me thank you notes for buying him school shoes, and the young woman who once called me her hero. James, I said finally, what would it take to modify the trust? Margaret, no, he said firmly. After what they've put you through, what would it take? James sighed. The trust is irrevocable, but there are provisions for emergency distributions under extreme circumstances. However, it would require unanimous agreement from all current beneficiaries and a demonstration of genuine rehabilitation from the recipients. What kind of rehabilitation? David asked, a spark of hope in his voice. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd built my life and career. Complete financial transparency. Every debt, every account, every obligation disclosed to James's office. Mandatory financial counseling for both of you. Community service. 200 hours each at the charities that would have received your portion of the inheritance. Mom, yes, absolutely, Sandra said quickly. Whatever you want. I'm not finished. I turned back to face them. David, you'll enter a debt management program and surrender all credit cards and access to loans. Sandra, the same. You'll both attend family therapy to address the underlying issues that led you to see me as a commodity rather than a person. Okay, yes, we'll do all of that, David said. And you'll sign a contract stating that if you violate any of these conditions, or if you ever again attempt to manipulate, defraud, or harm me in any way, the emergency distribution will be immediately revoked and you'll be responsible for repaying every penny. The room was silent except for the soft sound of Sandra's crying. There's one more condition, I said. You'll publicly apologize to Dr. Peterson for filing a false report about my mental health. And you'll explain to your creditors exactly how you ended up in this situation, that you borrowed money against an inheritance you never confirmed existed. David's pride warred with his desperation. Finally, desperation won. How much would the emergency distribution be? James consulted his documents. Given the circumstances and the restrictions Margaret is proposing, I could authorize enough to cover your immediate debts and provide a modest living allowance for 6 months while you rebuild. Perhaps 400,000 total. 400,000? Sandra's eyes lit up. That's more than enough to... Sandra, Rick's voice cut through her excitement. This isn't a windfall. This is your mother saving your life after you tried to destroy hers. The weight of that statement settled over the room. Harper spoke into the silence. Dad, Mom, do you understand what Grandma is offering you? She's giving you a chance to become the people she raised you to be. David looked directly at me for the first time since the meeting began. Mom, I don't know how we got here. I don't know how I became someone who would lie about my own mother's mental health for money. I know how, I said quietly. You started seeing me as an obstacle to your happiness instead of a person who loved you. You forgot that everything I have, I earned through hard work and sacrifice. You began to feel entitled to the fruits of my labor without contributing anything of value to my life. Sandra's crying had quieted to soft sniffles. Mom, if you do this, if you save us, I promise I'll be different. I'll be the daughter you deserve. Sandra, I don't want promises. I want to see change. Day by day, choice by choice. James was already preparing documents. I'll need 24 hours to draft the modification papers. Everyone will need to sign, including the charity representatives. As my family began to file out of the conference room, David stopped at the door. Mom, why? After everything we've done, why would you save us? I thought about that 8-year-old boy thanking me for his school shoes, about the young woman who called me her hero, about the grandchildren who might never know their parents if something happened to David and Sandra. Because underneath all the greed and manipulation, you're still my children. And sometimes love means setting boundaries, and sometimes it means offering grace. He nodded, tears in his eyes for the first time since he was a child. But David, I added, this is your last chance. If you waste this opportunity, if you hurt me again, there won't be another rescue. I understand. As they left, Harper lingered behind. Grandma, are you sure about this? I looked at my granddaughter, this young woman who had shown me what unconditional love really looked like. Harper, I learned something important today. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about giving people the chance to become who they were meant to be. And if they don't change, then they'll have made their choice, and I'll have made mine. Some people think forgiveness means forgetting, but I learned it means giving someone the tools to do better while protecting yourself from being hurt again. We'll see which path my children choose. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making Sunday dinner. But this time, everything was different. The first to arrive was Harper, fresh from her clinical rotation at the hospital. The nursing program that had once seemed financially impossible was now fully funded, and she was thriving. She burst through my front door with her usual energy, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers. Grandma, how was your week at the Literacy Center? Wonderful. We had 12 new students sign up, and Mrs. Patterson finally read her first complete novel. I accepted her hug and the flowers with equal warmth. How are your studies? Amazing. I can't believe I was worried about student loans. Having that stress gone has made all the difference. The front door opened again, and David walked in, looking like a man who'd aged backwards. Gone was the stressed, scheming person who'd sat in this kitchen 6 months ago plotting to steal my inheritance. This David stood straighter, smiled more easily, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd found his way back to himself. Mom. He kissed my cheek, a genuine gesture, not the calculating performance I'd grown accustomed to. Something smells incredible. Pot roast. Your favorite. I remember. He helped me set the table, and I noticed his hands were steady, his movements calm. I got some good news today. The debt management program says I'll be completely clear in 18 months instead of the predicted 2 years. That's wonderful, David. And the community service at the Children's Hospital. Mom, I want to continue even after my hours are completed. Those kids reminded me what really matters. I studied my son's face, looking for signs of the old manipulation, but found only sincerity. The financial counseling and therapy had been difficult for him, forcing him to confront how his relationship with money had corrupted his relationship with family. But the man standing in my kitchen now was someone I recognized, the little boy who used to help me fold laundry and tell me about his dreams. Rick arrived alone, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a sad but peaceful expression. Margaret, thank you for including me. Your family, Rick. You always will be. He'd filed for divorce from Sandra 2 months ago. Despite my financial rescue, despite the therapy and counseling, Sandra had ultimately chosen a different path. Any word from her? I asked gently. Rick shook his head. She finished the community service and the financial counseling because she had to, but her heart was never in it. Last I heard, she'd moved to California with some new boyfriend who promises to give her the lifestyle she thinks she deserves. David's face tightened with old family loyalty. She'll come around eventually. Maybe, I said, but that's her choice to make. The truth was that Sandra had completed the bare minimum required by our agreement, then immediately began looking for new sources of wealth and status. The therapy sessions had been exercises in blame-shifting and self-pity. She'd attended every required appointment while making it clear she felt victimized rather than rescued. 3 months ago, she'd met Jonathan, a venture capitalist who showered her with expensive gifts and promises of luxury. She'd called me exactly once since moving to San Francisco, to ask if I'd changed my mind about leaving everything to charity and whether there might be some way to access more of the trust. When I'd explained that her emergency distribution was a one-time offer and that the trust terms were permanent, she'd hung up on me. I hadn't heard from her since. "Harper," I said, changing the subject, "tell us about your clinical rotation." As my granddaughter shared stories about her patients and her growing confidence as a future nurse, I watched David listen with genuine interest and pride. The uncle who had once seen Harper only as competition for inheritance now celebrated her achievements wholeheartedly. "You know," David said, "I've been thinking about going back to school myself." "Really?" Harper looked surprised. "For what?" "Nonprofit management. All this time at the Children's Hospital has made me realize I want to work somewhere that makes a difference, not just money." I felt my heart swell with something I hadn't experienced in years: pride in my son. After dinner, we sat in my living room with coffee and the photo albums I'd pulled out months ago. But instead of painful reminders of better times, they now felt like evidence of the family we could be again. "Mom," David said quietly, "I need to tell you something." I braced myself, old fears surfacing. "I know you saved us. I know that without your help, Sandra and I would have lost everything, maybe even been seriously hurt by those lenders. But more than that, you saved me from becoming someone I hated." He picked up one of the old photos, the 8-year-old boy thanking me for his school shoes. "I want to be that kid again, the one who appreciated what you did for us instead of feeling entitled to it." "You already are that kid, David. You just forgot for a while." My phone rang, interrupting the moment. The caller ID showed James Morrison's office. "Margaret, I hope I'm not calling too late, but I have some news about the trust." "What kind of news?" "The Children's Hospital wants to name their new wing after you, the Margaret Thompson Pediatric Care Center. They said your donation was the largest single contribution in their history." I felt tears prick my eyes. That's wonderful. "And the women's shelter is opening a new job training program in your honor. They're calling it the Thompson Fresh Start Initiative." After I hung up, David was looking at me with something approaching awe. "Mom, how much did you give them?" "Enough to make a real difference." "But you could have kept that money. You could have traveled, bought yourself anything you wanted." "David, what would I want that I don't already have?" I looked around my living room. Harper was showing Rick photos from her clinical rotation on her phone. David was relaxed and genuinely present for the first time in years. My house felt like a home again, instead of a fortress I was defending against my own children. I have a granddaughter who's going to be an incredible nurse. I have a son who's rediscovering his moral compass. I have a garden full of roses and a cupboard full of food to share with people I love. "What about Sandra?" Harper asked softly. "I love Sandra, and I always will. But I can't force her to choose love over money, generosity over greed. That's a decision only she can make." As my family prepared to leave, David lingered at the door. "Mom, I want you to know, I understand now why you did what you did. If you hadn't protected your assets, if you hadn't forced us to face consequences, I might never have found my way back to being your son instead of your heir. And if Sandra decides to come back, the door is always open, but the terms remain the same. I won't enable destructive behavior, even from my own children." After everyone left, I sat in my quiet house with a cup of tea, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I'd been a mother under siege by her own children. Tonight, I was a grandmother watching Harper build her future, a mother seeing David rebuild his character, and a woman who'd learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable the worst in people. My phone buzzed with a text from Harper. "Thank you for today, Grandma. Thank you for everything. I love you." Then another from David. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me. I love you." And finally, unexpectedly, a message from an unknown California number. "Mom, it's Sandra. I've been thinking about what you said. Maybe we could talk sometime." I stared at that last message for a long time. Then I typed back, "I'm here when you're ready to have an honest conversation about who you want to be." The response came quickly. "I think I'm starting to figure that out." I set my phone aside and looked out at my garden, where Robert's roses were blooming in the evening light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose love over fear, wisdom over wealth. But tonight, I was simply a woman who'd learned that the best inheritance you can leave your family isn't money. It's the example of how to live with dignity, generosity, and uncompromising love. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, They learn to follow that example while you're still around to see it. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If my story taught you anything, I hope it's this. Never let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is selfish, and never give up on the possibility that people can change, even when they've hurt you deeply. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the stories that matter. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't measured by what you give others, but by how well you love yourself and those who truly deserve it. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Margaret Thompson Pediatric Care Center as I walked through the gleaming hallways, my volunteer badge swaying with each step. 3 years had passed since that fateful Sunday dinner, and the world looked remarkably different. "Mrs. Thompson," a small voice called out. 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez waved at me from her hospital bed, her face bright despite the IV in her tiny arm. "Did you bring more books today?" "Of course, sweetheart. I pulled out a new picture book about brave princesses. This one's about a grandmother who goes on adventures." As I read to Emma and 3 other children in the pediatric wing that bore my name, I marveled at how much joy this place brought me. The money that David and Sandra had once plotted to waste on luxury cars and credit card debt was now providing life-saving care to hundreds of children each year. My phone buzzed with a text from Harper. "Grandma, guess what? I got the head nurse position. Starting next month. Can't wait to tell you everything over Sunday dinner." Sunday dinners had become a cherished tradition again, though the guest list had evolved. Harper was now a registered nurse, radiant with purpose and completely debt-free thanks to her education fund. David attended regularly, bringing his new girlfriend Sarah, a social worker he'd met during his volunteer work. Their relationship was built on shared values rather than shared debts, and seeing him happy made my heart sing. Rick had found love again too, with a kindergarten teacher named Helen who appreciated his gentle nature. They'd married last spring in my backyard, surrounded by roses and genuine laughter. The one empty chair at my table belonged to Sandra. She'd returned to Portland 6 months ago, humbled by life in California when her venture capitalist boyfriend had turned out to be married and using her for an elaborate tax evasion scheme. She'd lost everything again, the borrowed money, the expensive gifts, even her self-respect. But this time, she'd come home different. "Mom," she'd said, standing on my doorstep with 2 suitcases and tears in her eyes, "I don't want your money. I just want to learn how to be your daughter again." The journey back hadn't been easy. Sandra was attending therapy twice a week, working as a receptionist at the women's shelter that had benefited from my trust, and slowly rebuilding relationships with her family. She joined us for Sunday dinners now, but carefully, gratefully, without the entitled demeanor that had once made my skin crawl. Last month, she'd done something that surprised everyone. She'd enrolled in community college to become a certified addiction counselor. "I want to help people who've lost themselves the way I did," she'd explained. "People who mistake things for happiness, money for love." As I finished reading to the children at the hospital, Dr. Peterson appeared in the doorway. Our relationship had been wonderfully repaired after I'd explained the circumstances of that manipulative appointment 3 years ago. "Margaret, do you have a moment?" We walked to his office, where he poured 2 cups of coffee. "I wanted you to know that your children's case has become something of a teaching example in our ethics courses," he said, "about the importance of independent verification and the dangers of family pressure in medical assessments. I hope it helps other families avoid what we went through. It already has. But I also wanted to tell you something else." He smiled warmly. "David called me yesterday." "Oh?" "He wanted to thank me for not filing charges against him and Sandra for the false statements they made about your mental health. He said he understood now why I'd considered it. I'd asked Dr. Peterson not to pursue legal action against my children, believing that rebuilding their character was more important than punishing their past mistakes. He also said something that stuck with me," Dr. Peterson continued. He said his mother had taught him that real wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away and how you treat the people who can't do anything for you in return. That evening, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Robert's roses were more beautiful than ever, and the oak tree we'd planted when David was born now provided shade for the entire backyard. My phone rang. James Morrison. "Margaret, the final trust reports are in. Over the past 3 years, your donations have funded medical care for 847 children, provided job training for 312 women, and taught 200 adults to read. I closed my eyes and smiled. Robert would be proud. He would indeed. But Margaret, there's something else. Sandra called me today. About what? She wants to establish a small scholarship fund for women returning to school after personal setbacks. She's pledging her entire salary from the shelter for the next 5 years. Tears welled in my eyes. My daughter, who had once seen money only as something to spend on herself, was learning to see it as a tool for helping others. As night fell over Portland, I reflected on the woman I'd become. 3 years ago, I'd been a mother defending herself against her own children's greed. Tonight, I was a grandmother watching her legacy unfold in ways money could never measure. The greatest inheritance I'd given my family wasn't financial security. It was the example of how to lose everything and find yourself, how to choose love over greed, and how to build wealth that truly matters. And the best part? I was still alive to see it all.